Hello there, AP Environmental Science class. Welcome to part one of my lecture on chapter three, ecosystems. What are they and how do they work? All right, so we spoke about how the first two chapters were kind of introductory chapters to environmental science. Now we're going to start getting into the real nitty gritty of what we're going to be learning this year. So once again, I will split this lecture into two parts. I think there are 44 slides. So again, it'll be about 22 slides per part here. Obviously, make sure to watch both parts one and part two. So once again, this is part one, chapter three, ecosystems. What are they and how do they work? So we start off with a core case study. Again, you'll notice in the book as you go through the readings, they do have a bunch of these case studies there to kind of look at actual events that are occurring around the world in environmental science. So for instance, this one talks about tropical rainforests that are disappearing. So tropical rainforests, most of them are near the Earth's equator. They cover only 2% of Earth's land, but they contain up to 50%, one half, of the world's known terrestrial plant and animal species. I want you to think about that for a second. 50% of the world's known terrestrial plant and animal species live in about 2% of Earth's land. Therefore, if you start messing with this 2% of land, you are messing with almost half of the world's known terrestrial plant and animal species. And that's why tropical rainforests are so important to biodiversity here on planet Earth. Major harmful effects of disruption, there we go, I just said it, reduces biodiversity, accelerates climate change because we're going to learn that trees sequester carbon. You probably know that already. We're going to study that a little bit more as we go through this chapter. So it accelerates climate change when you cut down rainforests, and it also changes regional weather patterns as well. So this is basically a picture of what I'm talking about. This is a natural capital degradation. This is actually a picture near Santa Cruz in Bolivia. On the left is June 1975. On the right is May 2003. And you can see how much rainforest has been cut down between 1975 and 2003 in this area. So again, this is what we're talking about here, reducing the size of these rainforests. So that was kind of a case study that kind of gets us into the chapter. So we'll start off with, how does the Earth's life support system work? Well, there are major components, basically four major components of Earth's life support system. You've probably heard of these: the atmosphere, which is the air, the hydrosphere, which is all the water here on planet Earth, the geosphere, which are the rocks, minerals, and the soil, and the biosphere, which basically all living things here on planet Earth. So what is the atmosphere? Well, the innermost layer of the atmosphere is known as the troposphere. That contains the air we breathe, and that's where most of the weather that occurs actually happens, in that troposphere. Next layer above that is the stratosphere. What's important about the stratosphere is that it contains the ozone layer, and without ozone, harmful UV radiation from the sun would make it down to the surface and basically kill most living things. So luckily, we have this ozone layer. It protects us from the sun's harmful ultraviolet radiation, and that ozone layer is in the stratosphere. Mesosphere, thermosphere, those are the two other layers of the atmosphere. We're not going to really concern ourselves too much with them because, again, they don't have much to do with Earth's life support systems. But obviously, the troposphere and the stratosphere do, so understand what's happening in each layer. Hydrosphere, again, all water vapor, liquid water, and ice. Oceans contain 97% of the planet's water, okay? And that's salt water. And when we get to talking about water, that's going to be one of the main issues we'll talk about. Only 3% of the Earth's water is fresh water, which is usable water for us to drink, for us to irrigate our crops. 97% of the planet's water is unusable because it's in the oceans, which means it contains salt. Geosphere, that's the upper portion of the crust that contains nutrients organisms need to live, grow, and reproduce. Also contains our non-renewable fossil fuels. That would be in the geosphere. And then the biosphere, basically parts of the atmosphere, hydrosphere, and geosphere where life is found. So here's just a kind of a little picture for you. Again, just kind of showing the hydrosphere, atmosphere, geosphere, and again, the biosphere. Again, the book does a nice job with these pictures, these graphics, kind of supplements what you're learning with the words. So again, if you like visuals, definitely take a look at these graphics. All right, so 3 factors that sustain the Earth's life. All right, the first factor is the one-way flow of high-quality energy from the sun. Obviously, that energy supports plant growth and warms the troposphere. Cycling of nutrients through parts of the biosphere. We'll talk about that in a couple of slides. And gravity, which holds the Earth's atmosphere here on the planet, right? Also enables the movement and cycling of chemicals through the air, water, soil, and organisms because of that gravitational pull. So again, those are the 3 factors: the one-way flow of high-quality energy from the sun, cycling of nutrients, and gravity. All right, and this is again another kind of picture, kind of showing this. Again, there's the sun's energy coming in. Number 1, number 2, half of it is absorbed by the surface. The other half is kind of sent back off into space. Then that solar radiation, number 4 here, absorbed by the Earth, is converted to heat and emitted as long wave radiation back out into space. And some of that infrared radiation, that long wave radiation, is trapped by greenhouse gases and then sent back down to Earth. That's a good thing. Greenhouse effect is a good thing. The problem is we are creating a runaway greenhouse effect here on planet Earth, which is trapping too much of that infrared radiation, that long wave radiation, and sending too much of it back down to Earth instead of allowing it to escape. So again, more on that as we go through the chapter and as we go through the course. All right, so what are the major components of an ecosystem? All right, so ecologists study 5 levels of matter. Basically, the biosphere, ecosystems, communities, populations, and organisms. And that goes from largest to smallest, all right? Biosphere, obviously the largest. Individual organisms would be the smallest of those 5 levels of matter. We also talk about feeding levels. These are trophic levels, is another way to describe them or to call them. Organisms are classified as producers or consumers based on their source of nutrients. Producers, also called autotrophs, make needed nutrients from their environment. They produce, right? They produce the nutrients themselves. That's kind of what auto means as well. Autotrophs means kind of doing it on your own, okay? So here are kind of those major components of the ecosystem. Again, biosphere up top, ecosystem, community, population, organism. And then if we want to go even further down, we can talk about the cell, the molecule, and the atom, obviously being the smallest unit of a chemical element. All right, so those are kind of the major components of an ecosystem. But when we talk about ecology, we kind of only go down to that organism level. Again, when you get down to the cell, molecule, and atom, now you're kind of moving into more environmental chemistry and things like that. Again, just looking at another picture, kind of showing these major components of the ecosystem. Again, you have your producers, you have your consumers, primary consumers, secondary consumers. We'll get into all of this as we go through the next couple of weeks, next couple of months. You have your decomposers, right? The water, the nutrients, precipitation, the sun, etc. These are all the major components of our ecosystems here on planet Earth. All right, so ecosystems are going to have several important components that we're going to need to know about. So first off, during photosynthesis, plants generate energy and emit oxygen. All right. So what is the basic formula for photosynthesis? Carbon dioxide plus water plus sunlight yields glucose and oxygen. All right. So that's how plants, right? That's how plants produce nutrients, and that nutrients is glucose for the plants, and obviously releases oxygen back out into the environment after sequestering or taking in that carbon dioxide. We also have consumers, also can be called heterotrophs. These cannot produce the nutrients they need. So consumers need to consume, right, the nutrients from elsewhere. So primary consumers, otherwise known as herbivores, eat just plants. Carnivores feed on the flesh of other animals, so they can be secondary or tertiary consumers. And omnivores, like us humans, eat both plants and animals. So here we have a lioness feeding on a zebra. Obviously, the zebra is a primary consumer, right, eating plants, while the lioness is a secondary or maybe could even be a tertiary consumer in the ecosystem of the savannas, which is the plains out there in Africa where this picture was taken. They're the consumers, right? So they're consuming the animal that produce or that is another consumer, but again, a zebra is a primary consumer, just eats plants, while the lioness, a secondary or tertiary consumer, would eat meat as well. We also have decomposers in the ecosystem. So we have their producers, we have our consumers, and then we have our organisms that decompose dead or dying matter. Right? These are consumers. They are considered consumers, but they are kind of their own separate category that release nutrients from wastes or remains of plants or animals. So real consumers don't necessarily do that. These decomposers, though, they are the ones that release these nutrients from waste or remains. The nutrients then are returned to the soil or the water or the air for reuse. This is that nutrient cycling we talked about. Bacteria and fungi are examples of decomposers. And then we have detritivores, which are creatures that eat eat the carcass that was killed by another animal. So they're not, detrivores are kind of like decomposers, but not exactly. They eat the carcasses or they eat dead animals that were actually killed by other animals. They don't kill the animals themselves, the detrivores, but they do eat that. So this again kind of shows you how this works. Here you have your detritus feeders. Again, those are the ones that are going to feed on something that is already dead, like your beetles and your ants and your termites, etc. And then you have, as time goes on, you have your decomposers, which come in. That's the fungus, the mushrooms, which then break down the material even more and then recycle those nutrients into the soil to be used by other producers. So this is how kind of the cycle of life continues here on planet Earth. Producers, consumers, and decomposers use chemical energy stored in the glucose, which comes from the producers, right? Which come for our plants. In most cells, energy is released by aerobic respiration. That uses oxygen to turn glucose back into carbon dioxide and water. There is also anaerobic respiration, which we will talk about at some point in this course as well. So once again, just kind of looking at the circle of life here, again, you have that high quality solar energy taken in by the producers, the plants. They then use that to create glucose, right? That then is eaten by the consumers, the plant eaters, right? Your primary consumers. Then those primary consumers are eaten by secondary and tertiary consumers. Then when things die, you have the decomposers, right? The bacteria, the fungi, which then take that material and turn it into nutrients that then could be put back into the soil for the producers to use to grow. And again, as this continues, that's the circle of life, and that's basically how our ecosystems work here on planet Earth. And obviously what we're going to learn is that by degrading the planet and doing things to hurt the environment, we are disrupting this cycle in many cases, and that obviously disrupts how the environment works here on planet Earth. All right, last slide we're going to do for part one is talking about soil. Soil is the foundation of life on land. Soil is a complex mixture of rock particles, mineral nutrients, organic matter, water, air, and living organisms. Soil is considered a renewable resource, but it does get renewed very slowly. All right, so that concludes part one of my lecture on chapter 3, ecosystems. What are they and how do they work? Make sure to tune in for part 2 of chapter 3. And as always, thanks for listening.